So let's get rocking. So this is MREA. Now, just so that you know, I put on the calendar that this was going to be a 2-hour block from 1 o'clock until 3 o'clock. And we may not necessarily go that whole time, depending on how the conversation goes and the questions that may come up. We may fill that entire block, but there's a pretty good chance that we're going to get through this material faster. I just wanted to make sure that people didn't have the expectation that this was going to just be a single 1 hour, because we won't be able to get through this in 1 hour. In fact, the typical millionaire real estate agent business planning clinic is really designed to be a full day. It's designed to be 8 hours. It's designed to kind of walk you through the activities of doing and filling out the forms and the calculations for your own business, which we won't be doing here. We don't have 8 hours today. What we're going to go through is how to do this, how to think about this, and then I'm going to ask you guys to kind of do the homework on your own and do these numbers for yourself. The good news, and I'll show you a little bit, that Command does a lot of the math for you in terms of the economic numbers of your business model. And so we're going to rely heavily on Command. The other good news is that I do hold office hours 3 times a week. Some of you have taken advantage of those on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. If you have specific questions about your business plan, that would be just a good place to jump in, and we can talk about that. But let's just get into, this is the book, right? We all have this, maybe, and maybe we don't. But if you don't have it, I'd encourage you to get a copy of it. And you know, it's one of those books that if you're like me, I'm kind of one of these geeky guys that likes to read business books. In fact, if you look over my shoulder, you're going to see part of my library with lots and lots and lots of books. And then if you look at this is my Kindle, where I've got probably 1,000 other books. And this is an important book to read, but it ain't the most riveting book to read, right? This is not a James Patterson novel that you're sitting on the beach, just can't wait to dig into it. But it's important to understand, and I will tell you personally, this is the book that changed my real estate career, which is to some extent how I ended up here. And I'm just going to share with you, in the very beginning of my real estate life, it wasn't going well. I had come out of healthcare. I had a good career in healthcare administration. And here was the arrogance, right? Here, the arrogance of how I started this is, I kind of didn't really think that real estate was going to be that complicated. I didn't think it was going to be that hard. I looked around and I saw people that I knew, family members that I had who were real estate agents. And I'm like, how hard could this really be? I mean, come on, man. I've got graduate degrees, postgraduate degrees. I'm working as a vice president in a big healthcare system. I just really believed that if you show up and you clean up and you look good and you smell good, that somehow the business is just going to come and find you, right? Well, newsflash, it ain't that way. And for the first 10 months when I started, I worked for a local real estate company. I'm contractually obligated not to mention their name on a recorded Zoom call. But if you were to look at the color scheme of their for sale signs, they are remarkably similar to the color scheme of New Jersey school buses. Some of you may know the yellow and black company where I started and where I managed. And what I was learning how to do in the very beginning was learning how to manage transactions. I was learning how to, host an open house. I was learning how to fill out the contract so I didn't get sued and all that sort of stuff. What I wasn't learning how to do is, how do you make business happen? And in the very first 10 months of my business, I had one closing. And it wasn't a big one. I think I made like $1,800. And my wife, who will be canonized a saint, she will be the first WASP canonized a Catholic saint for putting up with me during that time. What my wife said to me was, you might want to get a paper route or something to bring some money back into the house. Oh, time out. That's not what I wanted to hear. And it just wasn't working. And here's what happened. 2004, I was standing in the Barnes & Noble in Clark, New Jersey on Central Avenue, not far from where I live. And I came across this book. And I looked at it, and suddenly a huge light bulb went on in my head, because what this book was, it was the playbook. It was, I came out of a healthcare operations background, and suddenly someone gave me the operations manual. And they said, look, this is what you do. If you just do this, you're going to be fine. And so I went from 10 months of practically no income drop a pin in that month and go out 12 months later, I had close to $12.5 million in sale volume. The next 12 million, it was almost 17 million. And then I kind of got back on the management side of this. But my point in saying that was, when you have the playbook and you understand the models, life gets easier, right? And so that's what this is about. I'd encourage you to get a copy of this. I'd encourage you to read it. I'd encourage you to read it more than once. Again, it's not the most riveting read, but what I can promise you is every time you read it, you will learn something different because you're in a different place. Your business is in a different place. You will hear things in different ways, and they will mean different things to you. I'm probably up to maybe my 15th, 16th, 17th read of this, either between hard copy or audiobook. But what it starts with is this notion. In the very first couple of pages, there's a parable. There's a story. It's the hunter and the wolf. And in this story, you know, the father and the son are out. They're shepherds. They're out protecting their flock, and the wolf comes. And it's dark, and you can't see well. And in a teaching moment, the father says to the son, listen, son, here's the thing. What I want you to do is just understand that at night when you can't see well and when you're kind of caught up in the emotion of the moment, you take the rifle and you're going to aim at that wolf. The tendency is to aim low. And what I'm going to ask you to do is just trust me. Just aim a little bit higher than you think you need to aim, and you're going to hit your target. And so the son says, okay, Dad, I got you. And he readjusts his sights, and he pulls the trigger, and he falls the wolf. And the MREA starts with that story because that's really the way that we start to think about this. Is, you know, so many times we play safe in life. So many times we want to take the route that doesn't cost us to step so far outside of our comfort zone that we look foolish, and so far outside of our comfort zone that we fall down and we fail. And what Gary encourages us to do in this book is to say, look, you know, the purpose of business is to fund your perfect life, you know, and so dream big, right? Why would you dream small? And the reason why we try to reach for big goals is because when you have a big goal, it requires you to take a different kind of action than if you have a small goal. If you want to train to run a 5K run, you know, if you want to run a 5K, you're going to have to train differently than if you want to run a marathon. And if you want to run a marathon, you're going to have to train and take actions that are different if you want to run an ultra marathon or a triathlon. The bigger the dream, the bigger the action. So the purpose of business is to try to figure out how much money would it take for me to really create the life that I want for myself. And it forces us to have that conversation with the people who matter to us and to really think about, you know what do I want? What do I want for my kids? What do I want for myself? Where do I want to live? What kind of car do I want to drive? And it's not just about stuff. What do I want to do to make an impact with my money? What causes do I believe in? What kind of a legacy do I want to leave in my life? And at the end of the day, we start to add all that up and start to say, how much money does it take to do that? Because we live in a world that it costs money to do stuff. And we have so much baggage around money. You know, as a coach, I can tell you, I know for a fact that one of the hardest things to do as a coach is, as an agent starts to develop some success, is to find a way to turn up their thermostat around their comfort zone with having money. Because we all have this fantasy that we're going to hit it big. We all have this fantasy that we're going to win the lottery. But the truth of the matter is, once you start to begin to get money in your world, it can create some real tensions. We have lots of different things that we say about money in society. Money is the root of all evil. You know, money can't buy me love, right? The Beatles sang that. You know, here's what I'll tell you. Money can't necessarily buy you happiness, but you can be unhappy in a really nice place. That I know, right? But here's the thing. What we have to do is dream and think about what we want our life to be. And then we have to think about how much money does it take to create that? And once we know that, then we have to figure out, what do I need to do to make that happen, right? So the purpose of business is to kind of fund your perfect life. Start to think about your big why. What are you playing for, right? And why is it important to you? For me, I'll share this with you. For me, when I first got started, my daughter was in second grade. I grew up in a family that didn't have much money, which is one of the reasons why we had such attitude about money. And in order to go to college, I had to work 4 different jobs. I was a bartender. I was a music director for a little Methodist church. I was a nighttime manager for a supermarket. And I had some other things that I did on the side, a little bit more entrepreneurial. But the bottom line is, I had to bust my ass to go to school, and I could do it because back in the 1980s, college was cheaper, and that bubble hadn't gotten so out of control. And if you didn't live on campus, if you stayed at home and commuted to school, you could actually afford to do it. I don't think a kid today could do that anymore. But the thing that I decided was, I knew how hard that was. And what I wanted for my daughter was, if she could get in, that she could afford to go, and she could afford to go without having to take on any student loan debt. And I thought about what that would take, and I thought about how much money that would take, and I thought about how many years I had to put that money aside, and that was my commitment to her. And there were some other drivers as well, but we all have to know what we're playing for, and here's why. Because in order to have the success that you want, you're going to end up having to do things you've never done. You know, one of the real questions that I ask folks when I coach with them, and we start to think about what people's goals are, and I ask them a real sobering question, which is, what are you willing to sacrifice in order to make that goal come true? Because there's going to be sacrifice. You know, if you believe that anything worth having is not going to require you to make some sacrifice and to realign your priorities, you're kidding yourself. And the pathway between where we are and where we want to go takes us on a journey that's called doing things we've never done, getting outside of our comfort zone, and it is messy and it is uncomfortable. And in those moments where it kind of sucks, you got to be able to lean back on, what am I doing this for? All those days when I didn't want to get up and go to work, all those days when I didn't want to strap it on and get into the game, I had to go back and think, are you willing to let your daughter down? Right? Because you promised her that if she could get in, she could go. You're going to live up to that promise, or are you going to not live up to that promise? And I just determined for myself, I wasn't not going to live up to that. One of the things you got to do is you got to think about, what are you playing for? Have a big why. I do think sometimes that we have to recognize that the money that you're going to fund that big why with is profit. Right? Money after everybody else. And we're going to do some math and show you how to calculate how much gross total revenue do you have to bring into your world, so that after everybody's done fleecing you, you still have enough on the back end to have the life that you want. I think sometimes I ask the question about sacrifice. You know, what John Maxwell says is, every person who has ever achieved success has made sacrifices to do it. The bigger the goal, the greater the sacrifice becomes. You have to give up to go up. John Maxwell, one of the great leadership gurus of our generation. You know, I think having a vision board can help. You know, I think, does anybody have a vision board? Just unmute or put in chat. Does anybody have a vision board that they use, that they just kind of have out there that they look at? And you can say no too. I'd love to have some interaction here, because if I just talk at you for 2 hours, you're going to get bored to tears.
No, I don't.
Do not. Okay, terrific. Does anybody have one?
I have an old one.
What's that, Lourdes?
I have an old one.
You have an old one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You know, here's the thing about vision boards. What a vision board does is we take the thing that we want and we put it on the vision board. And the reason why we do it is because the human brain is a really amazing machine. And there's this thing at the top of our brainstem. There's a structure in our brain called the reticular activating system. And I don't want to get too caught up in biology, but what that part of the brain does is it prioritizes what you pay attention to. And it prioritizes the behavior that you engage in. One of the things, if you've ever noticed, Christina says she's always wanted a white Jeep, so I think she's going to put a vision board together today. Christina, I'm all with you on that. What the reticular activated system does, the RAS, is when you buy that white Jeep, Christina, you know what's going to happen? You're going to drive home from the dealership, and on your way back to your house, you're going to find like all these other people driving the same freaking white Jeep. It's like the same make, the same model, and you're like, wow, these people have class. These people are cool. And the truth is, those Jeeps have always been there. It's just that you never noticed them because it wasn't in your vision. What you focus on expands. And what we've also learned is that what you put in your field of vision, you also begin to unconsciously move towards. You know, there's a reason why if you drive down the highway and there's a sign on the road that says, if in the event that there's an emergency vehicle pulled over to the side of the road, you're supposed to take an action. You're either supposed to change lanes or you're supposed to slow down to 25 miles an hour. Now, slowing down is not always practical on the highway, but you're supposed to change lanes. And here's why. What we know is the thing that you look at, the thing that you pay attention to, you're naturally going to be drawn towards. And after enough state troopers died, as people were kind of mesmerized at the lights and drove right into the back of the cruiser, the state said, we got to put a law that says if you see the lights, you got to give more room, because we know that the thing that you focus on, you're going to take action to get drawn towards. I love a vision board. When you know what you're playing for, put it on a vision board. Now, it's not a magic board. You can't just put your white Jeep on the vision board and stare at it and stare at it and stare at it, and then automatically it shows up. No, you actually have to do some work, right? But the work that you do will be more in line with achieving the outcome that you want. If you've ever watched the Winter Olympics, which I love the Winter Olympics, probably even more than the Summer Olympics, because I get to see all the sports that I never get to see. You know, I don't know if I could stand curling as a regular sport in my life forever, but you watch the downhill skiing and the ski racing and all this kind of stuff, and it's cool. And if you watch the downhill skiers at the beginning of the run, sometimes you'll see the news broadcaster or the photographer sort of kind of zoning in on the skier, and they're standing at the top of the run before it's their turn, and they're kind of got their poles tucked under their arms, and you kind of see them moving around like this. And what they're doing is they're visualizing the perfect run again and again and again. In their mind's eye, they're seeing the actions that it takes to achieve the outcome that they want. What they're not doing is standing at the top of the hill and visualizing themselves standing on the podium getting a gold medal. That's the outcome. The vision board is the outcome. What we've got to get clarity on is, what are the different steps? What are the actions of the ski run that I have to master to get that there? And the vision board helps because naturally your unconscious will draw to the behaviors and the actions that will guide you to where you want to be. I love vision boards, but they're not magic. You got to do some work. And so when we do work, we follow some models. You know, Gary Keller was influenced early on by a professor at Baylor University, where he went to school. And the professor, I guess Gary was in his late teens, early 20s, a little bit, won't say arrogant, because I don't know that that's the right word, but he had strong opinions. And the professor said to him, you know what, Gary, people have lived before you, and you would be wise to follow in their footsteps. And he kind of took that little sage bit of advice and tucked it away, and like all 20-somethings would, it didn't really resonate. It was years later with Tony Robbins, the great Tony Robbins, right? Who is personal trainer, coach, guru, unlimited power, unlock the power within, all the different things that Tony Robbins is known for. And Tony had shared with Gary, you know, the thing that I do better than anyone, I think, is I model better. If people want an outcome, what I do is I study the people that are already doing it, and I learn how to copy them. You know, Warren Buffett said, people learn from their own experience, but smarter people learn from other people's experience, right? And so what Gary did with this particular book is he started to study the behaviors of the very best agents in the industry. How do they think? How do they behave? How do they budget? How do they structure their time? What do they do? And this book became a book of best practice models. And there's 4 of them that we're going to touch on today. We're going to do a deep dive on the economic and lead gen models. But there's 4 of them that we're going to talk about. And if you talk to Gary, he will be very clear that there was not a single person anywhere in the country that did all of the things that this book talks about. Some people did really well with the economic model. Some people had mastered the budget model. Some people had the organization model down. This book, if you will, is kind of a Frankenstein monster, a sort of a amalgamation of what best practice looks at in a couple of key areas. And it frames the way that we think in this company, right? And so it starts with the economic model. And the economic model is the numbers of our business. How am I going to measure my success? How am I going to know if I'm succeeding? Imagine going to a baseball game or a football game ever again in your life. Please, God, I want to see football come back. But imagine you went to a football game and there was no scoreboard. How would you know who's winning and who's losing in the chaos of what's going on in the field? You know, people play differently when you keep score. When I was a kid, I used to caddy at a country club up in Morris County. And I can tell you, in tournament play, people play differently than when they're just playing with their buddies and they're not really keeping score. And so the economic model says is, what are the things that I'm going to measure? How am I going to keep track so that I can take the right actions, right? And the lead generation model then says, in order to get these numbers to show up of the economic model, how big a database, how big a universe of people do I need to engage in? And what specific actions should I take part in so that the leads come in a sufficient manner that I can achieve my financial goals of the economic model? The budget model starts to talk a little bit about how do you make sure that you're profitable, because the purpose of business is to fund your perfect life. It's not just to create revenue if you're not keeping any of it. And there's a lot of folks who are really good. Entrepreneurs can be really good at generating revenue and really bad at keeping revenue. And the curse in that is, if you're good at generating money, then you don't always feel like you have to be so cautious about how you spend it, because you can just go out and generate more. But the budget model talks about how should you allocate your expenses so that you can be as profitable as you can be, right? And then finally, the organizational model, which really thinks about leverage, right? Think about leverage. What does leverage look like? When I was a kid in school, they used to talk about simple machines. I suspect that conversation doesn't happen anymore in second grade science classes, but we learned about pulleys and we learned about levers and fulcrums. And the idea of a lever was, if I had something heavy to lift up, I could jam a board under it. I could put a rock under the board, and using the length of the board, I could make that lift easier. What leverage is how do I make harder things easier to do? And in your business, you're going to want to think about leverage. For a solo agent, we think about leverage in terms of having really good, clear systems in place. So I do things consistently the right way, the same way every time, and I don't have to think about it. I just know what to do. As a solo agent, we think about leverage in terms of how can I rely on automation to do the things that can be easily repeated. You know, I think about Shane Force with Atlantic Home Loans. Many of you know Shane. One of the things that Shane does really well is he has a whole series of videos. And as people are at different parts of the transaction, he just sends them a link to the YouTube channel and asks them to watch the video and then call him if they have any questions. And what it does is it saves him from having the same conversation again and again and again and again. And that's leverage, right? And so the organizational model then also goes on to say, once we've got as much leverage as we can and we've built our business as big as we can build it by ourselves, or maybe as big as we choose to build it by ourselves. Because I've had plenty of agents who've come to me through the years and said, I could do more business by myself, but in order to do that, I would have to take too much time away from my children or something that they believe in and that's important to them. My question earlier on was, when you know what your big why is, how much are you willing to sacrifice to make it happen? And there's nothing wrong with saying, this is the limit of my sacrifice. I'm not taking time away from my kids. Okay, then at that point, you're going to need to rely on other people, right? And the organizational model helps you think about, how do you bring in people and how do you recruit for the right person for the right role and all those things. So these are the four models that we're going to talk about this afternoon. The economic model being the numbers, the lead generation model being the network that I need to build and the activities that I need to engage in to build the relationships that will make those numbers show up. Budget model being, how do I stay profitable? And the organization model is, how do I think about leverage? That's where we're going over the next hour and time. But before I go there, I just want any questions, any feedback thus far, anything that you have any questions about, or you know, before we move along. Gives me a chance to take a sip of water too. No? All right. Then we're moving. So again, the economic model, what does it do? It kind of connects the dots, between our income goal and our fundamental activities, right? And we begin with the end in mind. Stephen Covey, right, who wrote the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. One of those habits is they begin with the end in mind. They know where they want to go before they set out on the journey, right? There's a saying that I love that says, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. And while I believe that's true, if you are facing the wrong direction when you set out on your 1,000-mile journey, 1,000 miles later, you're going to be in the wrong damn place. And so we got to figure out, where do I want to go so that I can set up to be in the right path to make it happen? What we have to start with in our business economic model is by beginning with the question, how much profit does it require for me to fund the life the way I want it to look? And again, I'm going to encourage you to not play small ball. Now, I'm also going to encourage you to be realistic too. I had an agent one time tell me that their goal was, in the first 12 months of their business, they wanted to net, after all expenses, $7 million. And I said, that's a really good goal. And there's a pathway to get there, but it's not as a solo agent. And there's a pathway to get there as a team. And do you know how to do that? Do you know how to build that? Do you know how to generate leads to the volume that could support that team? Is that a realistic goal for year one? Probably not for most people, right? But how much profit are you looking for? Now, the thing that you have to understand is, in the modeling that we're going to do, in the command goal setting that we're going to do, we don't necessarily account for taxes, right? What you have to think about is, how much profit do I need to generate so that after I pay my taxes out of that profit, I still have what I need? Right? Just understand that we haven't accounted for taxes in the calculations here. And how much money you need to put aside for taxes is really a conversation between you and your tax people. But for most agents, it falls somewhere between 25 or 30% to maybe as high as 50%. But those are sort of extraordinary circumstances. But have a conversation and figure out what it is. And the thing I'm going to encourage you to do is pay your taxes on time, right? You know, again, the challenge for a lot of us is that we get money and we believe that we have all of that money for ourselves, and we don't. Uncle Sam has a cut, you know, and we have to remember when our taxes are due. Does anybody know when your taxes are due to the government? And I don't necessarily mean this year, because with COVID, things have gotten a little bit wacky. But as a business owner, when is the tax due to the government? Anybody have a thought on that?
Quarterly.
Who's that?
It's Peter, quarterly.
Peter Quarterly. Hello, Peter Quarterly. No, yeah, it's quarterly. Any other ideas?
I thought it was as you earn, you should be paying.
You know, Lourdes, were you ever CPA?
No.
Did you come from finance?
No.
You're right. IRS regulations require that the money is paid as you earn it. What happens for an independent contractor whose earnings can be so inconsistent and so whatever, is it's just not practical to send the IRS a check every time you have a closing, right? And so what they do is they say, look, we're going to allow you to estimate it on a quarterly basis and send it to us in chunks. And then once a year on the 15th of April, we're going to kind of balance the books and really take a look and see, did you estimate correctly or did you not estimate correctly? But make no mistake, your taxes are due the moment you earn the money. And you're given some flexibility around that. If you were working in a corporate setting, your payroll people would take care of that for you. You would never see that money because you would earn it. The payroll company would take it out and wire it to the IRS, and then you would get what was left. But as an independent contractor, you've got to take care of that yourself. And you've got to account for state taxes. You've got to account for federal taxes. And then there's this other pesky tax that we call the self-employment tax. Ooh, anybody know what the self-employment tax rate is? Last time I Googled it, and I should have probably been more prepared for this, but I believe it's somewhere around 11%. 11% of your income is what you owe as self-employment tax on top of your state and federal taxes. And the self-employment tax covers things like Medicare when you retire, right? It covers things like Social Security income when you retire. Normally, You would be paying into that, and your employer would be paying part of that as well in a traditional business model. But in this independent business model, you got to cover the whole freight. And so we just got to make sure we're putting enough aside, right? So when you think about, I can only fund my life with profit, I got to make sure I've accounted in that profit enough that after I paid my taxes, I still have what I need, right? Don't lose that. The model is simply this. You've got to have enough to pay your taxes. You've got to have enough to cover what we call cost of sale, which we're going to talk about in a minute. And we've got enough to cover your operational expenses so that what's left over, the residual there, is what you need. Now, the model would be simply this: your profit plus your cost of sales, which we'll talk about in a second, plus your expenses equals your gross commission income, right? How much profit do I need? How much do I cover in my cost of sales? Which in short basically means the cost of being in business. And we'll talk about that. It's not operating expenses. We'll unpack it in a second. But profit plus cost of sales plus business expenses, you add all that together, and that's how much gross income you need to put at the top of the funnel. And then what we do is we look at that number and say, okay, how much gross commission and income is there in an average transaction for me? And if we're going to assume that the average sale price is maybe $500,000, which is probably a fairly safe Bergen County number. I think the median price in Bergen County is a skosh lower than that. It's probably in the 480s. But I think 500 is a fair number. If you assume 2.5% on a single side, a single transaction, which is probably a pretty safe number, then 2.5% of a $500,000 sale means you're going to make $12,500 on every closing. And that's the top of the funnel GCI. Once I determine how much total GCI I need and what my single transaction GCI is, I just divide the two to figure out how many transactions it's going to take to do this. And once I know that, now I can start to build a path, right? What would it take? What mix of activities is it going to take to make that number of transactions show up? So I'm going to hold this slide for a second because I thought we were going to unpack GCI, the cost of sales, next, but here's what it's going to come in a later slide. But I want to just make sure that you understand what cost of sale is. If we were in a different industry, if I was in the business of making blue pens, the cost of sale would be, how much does it cost to source the material? How much does it cost to produce the product? How much does it cost to get the product to market? How much overhead do I need to build in to cover for all the expenses of marketing this thing, so that when I sell it, I have enough, right? That's what cost of sale is. It's kind of, what does it cost to kind of do? Now, we don't work in a business where we're creating widgets, where we're creating pens or products. We work in a business where we're providing service, right? And in the service industry, the way we describe cost of sales in real estate brokerage is, how much does it cost to be in relationship with your brokerage? Because you can't do it without being in relationship with a brokerage unless you have a broker's license of your own, and then you can go out and start your own company, and then your cost of sales numbers can look different. But we know what it costs to be in a relationship with our broker, right? What is it? It's a split. And the beauty of our model is there's one split. It's a 70-30 split. Company gets 30% of all of your commissions until we reach a certain number. And that number is called the cap. And that cap in your market center in Bergen County is probably $37,000. Unless you're in Rutherford, where it's $32,000. And you're like, wait, hold up. I didn't know there's different caps. Yeah, there are. There's different caps in different market centers because the cap is calculated by what is the economic opportunity like if you're doing business in this market. And so it's based on things like how much transaction volume is there in the market? What is the average sale price in the market? If you were doing business in Jersey City, the cap is going to be $45,000. If you're doing business in Manhattan, your cap is going to be $60,000. If you go down to Louisiana, your cap is probably going to be $22,000 because the opportunity is different there based on the price point, right? But if we take the cap of our company dollar, we call it the company dollar, the dollars that we share with our company, and I also have to pay 6% as a franchise royalty. And what the hell is that? It's 6% of every transaction with an annual cap of $3,000 per agent per year. Does anybody know what that franchise royalty pays for? or what that expense covers. Anybody have some ideas around that?
Well, that pays for it's basically for us to take advantage of Keller Williams' system.
Systems, things like all the people that are in Keller Williams International that are not self-supporting through selling houses, they've got salaries they've got to get covered. And those are people that are doing things like putting training together. Those are people that are the legal department. Those for sure, a lot of that is the development of the technology, right? Keller Williams has committed $1 billion to develop the technology of command with all its artificial intelligence and all its machine learning. And that $1 billion investment is coming out of the franchise royalty. We are not a publicly traded company. We can't sell shares to raise those monies. We're a privately held company. That money can only come from money that we generate through sales. And so when you take the $3,000 that goes to the franchise and you take the $37,000 that goes to the company, that's what it costs to be in a relationship with this brokerage. And you put those two together and you have a cost of sale of $40,000 every year, right? Now it's different. If you're not doing a lot of volume, if you only do 2 deals a year, it's going to be whatever the dollar value is of 30% and 6% of whatever transaction volume you have if you haven't capped. But the thing I want you to just understand is that's what cost of sale is. And so we have cost of sale. We have overhead expenses to operate our business. Keep in mind, cost of sale does not include my marketing costs. Those are business expenses, right? But they're not cost of sale. Now, how much GCI do I need? Here's just a kind of an interesting thing I want to just share with you. And I took this slide from the course Lead Generation 3612-3 that I just finished last month. And I'm going to give some different examples throughout the afternoon today. Some of the examples are going to come from that class where the goal was to try to generate 36 transactions in 12 months with 3 hours a day of lead generation time. That's what 3612-3 stands for. And some of the examples that I'm going to give you today are screenshots of a consultation I did with an agent in another market center. And we looked at their command and then we did some screenshots around that. So I'm going to give you some real life examples here. But the economic model in the MREA, if we were assuming 36 transactions a year, which was the goal of the course 3612-3, your number could be different. Remember, for your number, it's what do I need divided by the average cost, the average gross commission income per transaction to come up with what your number is. But the model suggests that if we have a number, and in this case it was 36, what it begins with an assumption that says half of the revenue is going to come from listing side business and half of the revenue is going to come from buyer side business. And in the best of all worlds, when a real estate business is running in a healthy way, it kind of looks that way. I think in the very best of all worlds, it kind of leans a little bit more to 60% of the revenue comes from listing side volume and 40% of the revenue from buyer side volume. But why do we think about the models this way? These are things that I call vital signs. You know, coming out of a healthcare environment, you know, if I was to pass out and fall down on the floor and someone took me to the emergency room, the EMTs would begin to start to take some vital signs. They would take a look at blood pressure and they would take a look at respiration and they would take a quick scan of body temperature to try to figure out what's going on. And the way that they do that is they know what those measurements should look like if I was healthy. Clearly I ain't healthy because I'm laying flat out on the ground. And so what they're going to take a look at is how do they differ from what I'd expect a healthy patient to look like. And based on how they differ, they're going to start to determine what's going on. If my blood pressure goes through the roof high, they're going to think something different is happening than if my blood pressure drops low. If my body temperature goes to 105, they're going to think something is different than if it drops down to 95. And so how you separate yourself from what the expected pattern looks like is a way that you can start to diagnose, how is my business running? And what we believe in what we know is that buyers are the byproduct of sellers. And we know that because the fastest and easiest way to get into a relationship with anyone who wants to spend money in any market is to control the thing that they want to spend the money on. If I control the product that you want to buy, you're going to come find me. If I don't control that product, you got to come find me. I mean, I got to come find you. If I don't control the inventory and I want to meet you, a person who wants to spend money, I got to go find you. And me as a seller, finding the buyer that way is too time consuming. It's more expensive. It's not as efficient. The easiest thing to do is to control the market. And then you're going to come to me. And so we control the listing inventory the same way that every market works. If you want to buy stocks, you have to go to where the stocks are being sold. If you want to buy cornflakes, you got to go to where the cornflakes are. Imagine if the cereal manufacturer didn't have a supermarket. They'd have to have teams of cornflake salesmen roving around the streets like crazy people trying to sell cornflakes. That just is crazy. That doesn't work. The model says for every listing that I take, the marketing of that listing should put me in the pathway of enough leads, of qualified buyers, that I should close one buyer for every listing that I take. And that's where this 50-50 break happens. Now, it isn't always the way it is, but this is what a healthy business really starts to look like. And so if I needed 36 transactions, I would assume 18 of them would come from sold listings. I'd assume 18 of them come from buyers. And then we go through the average sale price. And in this instance, we said $500,000, which would be a $12,500 commission per side. 12,500 times 18 sales is $225,000. Same holds true on the buyer side, $22,500. If I generated 36 closings, my total gross commission is $450. And if you had a $450 goal with a $12,500 price, that's what it would take. Now, other thing you want to do is in the MREA, we've got to think about these things that we call conversion rates, right? Conversion rates help us to predict. What the model says in the MREA is that we would expect that a good agent should get the listing 80% of the time when they go on the listing appointment. 20% of them you won't get, but 80% you will. Your mileage may vary, right? If you're not at an 80% conversion, what would it take for you to get better, right? What would it take for you to convert to that level? Keep in mind, right? Keep in mind that you're never going to be at 100%. The thing that influences your conversion on the listing appointment more than anything else is actually not your script. It's not the quality of your consultation skills. It's not the power of your presentation or maybe some secret marketing tool that you have. The thing that's going to drive that conversion higher more than anything else is, where did this lead come from? Because if this was a lead that was given to me inside my database where a friend or a family member said, you know what, you think you want to list your house? That's great. You know what? Lourdes Henry is the best there is. You really should talk to her. I go and I talk to Lourdes. It's Lourdes's deal right there to lose. Because if a friend and someone that I trust put me in front of Lourdes, then I'm going to assume that Lourdes is the right one unless something happens that proves otherwise. Which is why we focus so heavily on your database, which is why when we get to the lead gen part of this model and it's so focused on database, because your database leads are way easier to convert. If you spend your whole day trying to chase down for sale by owners and expireds, while you can get good at your scripts and while you can get good at your processes and while you can get pretty good at conversion, those don't convert anywhere near as high as database-driven leads. And it's just harder. A lot of people say that these for sale by owners, they're low-hanging fruit because we know what they want to sell. Yeah, they're low-hanging fruit, but they're the freaking hardest ones to pick. I can guarantee you that. Work your database. The other assumption in the database, in the MREA, is that 65% of the time, when you get in front of a buyer to do a buyer's consultation, 65% of the time, they're going to sign a buyer's agency agreement with you. It's not as high a conversion. 80% of the listings sign, only 2/3 of the buyers. Now, does anybody have any thought about why that might be true? Anybody have some thoughts around why buyer side conversion is lower on average than listing side conversion?
Because we don't ask.
Well, that's part of it. Yeah, that's a big part of it. But I think there's also parts of it that I think I think consumers' expectation of what the role of a buyer's agent is different than what a role of a seller's agent is. And it's an education issue as much as anything else. In our organization, in our state, if I had to handicap it, I would suggest that probably 5% of the agents actually ask their buyers to sign a buyer's agency agreement. Probably in most of the United States, it would be illegal to represent a buyer without one. But in New Jersey, it's not, and we don't ask. But here's the assumptions. These conversion assumptions: 80% of the appointments turn into listing signed. 65% of the buyer consultations turns into buyer signed. And of that group, 2/3 of the buyers are going to find a house and get to a closing table. 80%. Oh wait, I'm sorry. This is the appointment conversion. I have this backwards here. This is 65% of the sellers actually get to a listing that closes. Not every one of your listings is going to close, or it's not going to close this year. And the truth is, in the industry, the fall through rate on listings taken to listings closing industry wide is way higher than you think. It's probably about 25%. And the model simply just accounts for that. Most of the time your listings are going to close, but a lot of times they're not. And you can influence that. You can influence that by managing expectations better. You can influence that by not taking listings that aren't really saleable, meaning properties that are not priced competitively for the marketplace, properties that have some sort of off-site condition that makes them hard to sell. There's lots of different ways you can manage these numbers. 80% of the buyers that you have a signed agency agreement will find a house and close on it, according to the model. Right? These are just some basic assumptions, and you're going to see where they come into play a little bit later. Again, in the model, in the MREA, it assumed an average sale price of $250 at the time that was written. That was kind of a national average. In the numbers that for us, it probably is closer to $450 or $500 for much of our market, but you would have to determine what that is for your market. The average commission, as we discussed, is going to be a function of your average sale price. But the assumption is that we split the business half between listing side and half through buyer side. So if we do these conversions, what it tells us is how many appointments do I have to create over the course of a year? And we start from the top down here when we're thinking about how much gross commission income does 36 transactions lend to. But when we're trying to think about appointments, we take these conversion rates or whatever ours are, which means we have to track. We have to track our numbers. And we work from the bottom up. Here's how this looks. If I need 36 transactions, 18 closings on the selling side, 18 closings on the buying side. If 2/3 of the listings taken get to the closing table, if I need 18, I divide 18 by 0.65 and I come up with 27.7 listings that I really have to take. And that 0.7 is a little troubling. It's hard to list a 0.7 of a house, so you're going to round that up to 28. And then we work that conversion up yet again. If 80% of the time when I go on the listing appointment, I get it, and I need 27.7, you divide that by 0.8, and it says I got to go on 34.6 listing appointments. Again, the 0.6 appointment is hard. You've got to round that up. It's not like you're halfway through the listing appointment and you're like, screw it, this isn't going well, I'm out. No, you gotta round these numbers up. I need 35 listing appointments to happen. In your business model, the most important number that you could ever focus on is how many listing appointments do I need to generate over the course of 12 months so that I can generate the income that I need. Because here's what the model again says. We go back to the conversions on the buyer side. If 80% of the buyers under contract get to closing and 2/3 of the buyer consultations turn into the contracts, I need 34.6 or 35 buyer consultations to happen over the course of a year to get to 36 closings. And if we trust that the buyers are the byproduct of the listing inventory that we control, the big question is, if I take 27 listings a year, in the marketing of those listings, can I put myself in the pathway of enough buyers that I can get 35 bona fide buyer consultation appointments? That's how this model fits together, right? That's how this model fits together. Now, this is going to be recorded, and I'm going to park it up on the YouTube channel for Bergen County Partners. So you can come back and watch it again. I believe I recorded it. I hope I recorded it. Anyway, if not, I'll record it again. This is the number. This, at the end of the day, figure out how to get 35 listing appointments to happen. If you do that and your conversion rates hold, everything else works. But that starts to inform our lead generation model, because now the lead gen model is how big a universe of people, how big a database, what mix of activities would it take to make 35 appointments happen? And again, these are bona fide listing appointments where you're going with the expectation of walking out with a signed listing agreement. This is not, hey, you know what? I'm thinking about selling my house at the end of the year. Can you come over and kind of tell me what I need to do to get things ready to fix it up so I can maximize the sale? That's not a listing appointment. That's an important appointment to go on, but that's not a listing appointment. The listing appointment is, I'm expecting to get signed paperwork tonight. Did I get it or did I not? You got to know your conversions, right? Because that's going to change what these numbers look like for you. And the beauty is Command will help you with that. So while I'm not going to try to actually take the time to log into my Command account and walk you through a tour of Command, I am going to show you some screenshots that I said I had of sort of a consultation I did with an agent in a different market center where the numbers were a little bit different. This was a market center where the cap was not 37, it was actually 37,500, a smidge higher than us in Bergen County. And what this agent determined is their profit goal. Where you're going to find this, by the way, is you go into Command, and I like to go all the way right away to the upper left-hand corner where there's that KW in red, and I like to click on that because that opens up the menu and I can see what's what. And I'm going to go down to the place called Reports. And when I click on Reports, if you look across the top header, what you're going to see is one of those buttons says Goals. And when you click on that, it's going to bring you to this page. And it's going to ask you, what year are you doing this for? This is 2020. It's going to ask you, okay, how much profit are you trying to create in your life? You can only fund your life with profit. What are you looking for? And in this instance, the agent wanted $100,000. So we put that right here. It actually says US dollars. I don't know whether you have an opportunity to do it in other currency, but $100,000 is what we plug into this number. Now it asks us, what's your cost of sale? How much is the maximum you would pay to your broker and to the franchise over the course of a year? And in this office, with a $3,000 royalty cap, which is the same for every Keller Williams office in the company, and a $37,500 cap, the cost of sale here was $40,500. And then we took a look at business overhead, and we said, what's your run rate? How much are you spending to operate your business? And we looked at things like, your marketing costs and your advertising costs, and how much do you pay in E&O and board dues and all that stuff. And the average was about $3,000 a month, about $36,000 a year. We plugged that in, and then we clicked the next button. And this is where Command gets really fun, because remember those conversions that I talked about? Well, Command already has some conversions built in. It's kind of baked into the sauce here. I want to caution you, though, that these may not turn out to be your conversion numbers. You have to override and just put in not what's standard there. What are your real numbers? Because if you're converting at a 90% listing appointment to listing taken, then you're doing better than these numbers. But these numbers are calculated when people put their transactions into Command, right? And that's what we're doing now. We have an opportunity, we put that opportunity in Command, and when that opportunity converts to a listing taken, we now change that status. It's a listing taken. When it goes under contract, we move it along. When it gets to the closing table, we close it, and we track this. And as we have an entire company putting their transactions into Command, Command is calculating company-wide conversion rates. And that's what's going to be in here unless you change it on your own. But what it assumes is that when we think about the language of leads and contacts, and let's just stop for a second there, because a lead in the language of Command is someone who we have reliable contact information for, but we don't have a two-way relationship yet. Someone that I got your phone number and it's a good phone number, and I know I can send you a text, but we don't have a two-way engagement yet. Maybe you came to my open house and you signed into my open house, but you're not following up with me despite all my best efforts. That's what we call a lead. In the old language of the MREA, we used to call that a haven't met. Somebody who I haven't really established a relationship with yet. In the language of command, we're calling a contact somebody who has kind of stepped over and they've gone from no real back and forth communication to they've engaged now. And in a two-way, I have permission to have a two-way engagement. And what the conversion rates say is that for 100% of your database, 35% of the people who you will have in your lead section, the one-way communication, 35% of them are going to raise their hand and engage you and become contacts. And then what it says is that 50% of the contacts over time will allow you to schedule an appointment with them if you engage. Now, it may not be this year, right? But they will engage, 50% of them. And then what it goes on to say that of the appointments that you set, 75% of those are going to keep those. Only 25% of those are going to blow you off. And I think that number is outrageous. I think if we've done a good job of qualifying, and if we've done a good job of nurturing this relationship all the way through from the beginning of the relationship to the time it's time to meet, I would expect the appointment set and the appointment conversion to be closer to 100, but it assumes 75%. And then it assumes that 75% of the time that turns into an agreement. Out of those agreement, it assumes 75% of the time will go into a contract, into a closing. And so these are just numbers that are in there right now. And again, these constantly change because they're based on actual, what's really happening across the country. And so I did this quite a while back. I suspect if you went in there today, the stock conversion rates could look very different, but based on those numbers, and once you track your own numbers and you know what yours are, put yours in. But once you put in the conversion rates, here's what happens. It does this math for you. It says, okay, here's your goal. You wanted $100,000 of profit. And here's what we're going to determine. If you have 256 people in your database that you have one-way communication with, and 90 people that you have two-way conversion with, then what's going to happen? That's the right mix. Because if you follow up with those 256 consistently, and you follow up with those 90 consistently, and we have different follow-up campaigns, it's 36 times a year for the contacts, it's 19 times a year for the leads. But if you follow up with them in the right order, then what's going to happen is you're going to get to the appointments that you need. And you're going to keep the percentage that you need, and you're going to get to the number of agreements, and that's going to get to the number of earned contracts, and it's going to get you to the closings. In this example, trying to get $100,000 of profit with a $500,000 sell price required a database of 256 leads, 90 contacts, and 14 closings a year, and Command did the math. I want to stop here for a second because as I was going through that, I opened up the visual here, and I see a lot of I's getting crossed. And sometimes that's 2 o'clock in the afternoon and it's warm, and sometimes these are just numbers, but I want to make sure that everybody's still with me. You follow the numbers here in terms of how this is calculated so far? Anybody want me to just take a second and go back and recap any of that? Because I'm happy to do it. Okay, then we're going to keep moving. And what happens now, and this is where it's cool. The truth is, the model, the lead generation model, we're going to come back to Command in a minute. The lead generation model, which is the next model, illustrates the relationship between the contacts in our database and the transactions in our economic model. And it helps you calculate the cost per each action. It helps you calculate how much does it cost to run this plan. It shows why prospecting and marketing based lead generation is really, really cost effective. And here's some assumptions. Again, back to the MREA. It assumes that 75% of your business is going to come from people that you already know, and 25% of your business is going to come from people that you don't really know well yet. It assumes that you already have 100 contacts in your database already in your Command account. and you may not. But it assumes that you've already got 100. And then it also assumes that when we put people into command, that we do two really important things. One is we put them through a touch campaign that we call an 8x8, and we have a smart plan for an 8x8, which means I'm going to reach out to you 8 times over 8 weeks. Once a week for 8 weeks, I'm going to reach out to you. And the reason why we do that is because it's how we establish mind share. It's how we establish a sense of familiarity that you don't forget who I am. There was a research project done years ago by a marketing company called Hobbs Herder, who's still out there. They do marketing for real estate agents. And what Hobbs Herder did is they wanted to figure out how long does it take for people to remember your brand? What needs to happen? Because there's so much competition out there that we have to be top of mind. And so here's the experiment. The experiment was they created a phony real estate agent, who we can call Mary Jones for this purposes of this example. And they created a phony real estate company that we can call the XYZ agency. And once a week for 8 weeks, into a community outside of San Diego, California, of about 30,000 homes, once a week for 8 weeks, they sent a piece of marketing material branded to Mary Jones. And it was a newsletter, and it was a recipe card. I don't know what it was, but once a week for 8 weeks, they sent something branded to Mary Jones. And then at the conclusion of those 8 weeks, they commissioned a telemarketing survey, a wide-ranging telemarketing survey that looked at all kinds of things. If you needed to have your car serviced, where would you go? If you were going to change your cell carrier, who would you use? When they got to the category of real estate agents, the question was, if you needed to use or recommend the services of a real estate professional in the San Diego area, who would you use? Mary Jones got over 60% of the response. Mary Jones didn't exist for real, except she did, kind of. She existed up here in their head because they saw her stuff again and again and again. She was right at the tip of the tongue. Who would you use? Oh, I'd use Mary Jones because she's the one who's in my brain. Had they waited a month, 2 months, 6 months, and sent no more Mary Jones stuff, the Mary Jones response rate would have probably been 0 because she wasn't real. But the point is, if you want to kind of push yourself into somebody's brain so they remember who you are, it's 8 times over 8 weeks. And so we call that an 8x8. And as I meet someone for the first time and they move from the lead side or the haven't really got a two-way relationship to the two-way relationship side, I first got to put them on an 8x8 so that I'm kind of branding them. And then once that's done, then I roll them into a 36 touch plan 3 times a week, 3 times a month for 12 months. And it's a combination of emails and text messages and social media touches and postcards and things so that it doesn't feel so oppressive. I'm not going to ask you to start stalking anybody and get arrested. That's not what we're looking to do with the 36 touch. What we are looking to do is the consistency over time, again and again and again, so you are just top of the mind. And that's the assumption of the lead generation model. 75% of your business is going to come from people that you already know. They're already there. I've done this exercise in other classes, but I'm just going to do it again real quick now just to give you a real practical thing I want you to look at. I want you to just get your phone. And if you were to take out your phone, I'd encourage you to go to the contacts part of your phone where you keep all your phone numbers. And just open it up and scroll all the way down to the bottom. And when you get to the bottom, there's a number of how many contacts do you have in your phone? Anybody want to share what number they have on their phone? I have 885. Who else has got another number?
719.
How much? 719? Okay. Any other numbers? It doesn't matter what your number is, but there is a number. And here's what I want you to understand. A, if you're like me, 885 contacts are there. I could probably say that there's a big chunk of them that I could look at and go, I don't have any idea who the hell they are or how they got in my phone. And the work is to kind of call that database and to talk to people and to figure out who's really in your phone. But the thing that I want you to understand is this. Research tells us that about 65% of the American population will become homeowners over the course of their lifetime, and about 35% of them will stay renters. And NAR research tells us that the average person moves about once every 10 years right now. And if the average person moves once every 10 years, it means 10% of the people are likely to move this year. So if I was to take my phone that says I have 885 contacts, and I assumed that 2/3 of those people will become homeowners over the course of their life, I take 885, I multiply it by 0.65, and I got 527 people in my phone right now who are likely to become homeowners. And then if we assume that the average person moves once every 10 years, that means 10% of the people move every year. Then I multiply that by 10%. And in my phone today, I don't know if you can see this, but that's 57.5 transactions. It's 58 deals. Are they going to be done with you? And the answer too many times is no, because I don't have the level of relationship that they remember me, or that they believe that I'm capable of helping them. But the opportunity is there. And so the thing that I'm going to tell you is this assumption that 75% of your business is going to come from people that are already in your world is a layup. If we build a relationship with them, we nurture those relationships with them, and we do that, right? Anyway, what I want you to understand, and again, this comes from the course 3612.3. I said I would steal some slides from that class. In that model, if we were trying to generate 36 transactions, what we know based on conversions, because we study this, and if you follow and stay engaged with your database in the predictable way, which is 19 times a year, all different ways, emails, touches, social media, 19 times a year for your leads, 36 times a year for your contacts will convert predictably at a 10-to-1 conversion rate, meaning for every 10 people that you are engaged with at that level of interaction, you should expect 1 deal a year. It's a 10-to-1 conversion. On the lead side, it's not as good. It's 50-to-1. For every 50 people that are hearing from me, even though they're not responding, for every 50 that are hearing from me 19 times a year, one person is going to turn into a transaction. Either they're going to use me or they're going to refer me. But it's a 50-to-1 conversion. And so you think about your database. And what the MREA assumes is that you already have 100 names. You decide how many you really do have. But here's what the math tells us. If I need 36 transactions, and again, this is the 3612.3 class. If I need 3612 actions, and I have a 10-to-1 conversion ratio, then I multiply 36 times 10, and it tells me if I have 360 people in my database, that's all I need. If I'm engaged at that level, at that 36 times a year. If I've already got 100 in there, then I only need to have a gap of 260 that I got to figure out how do I close that. And if I needed to do it quickly in a month, it would be 65 a week. If that's too big a number, then how many could I do in a month? And how many months would it take? But the model, the conversion model here just simply tells us that a database of 360, if everyone is converting on a 36 touch plan, a database of 360 gets me my 36 deals. On the lead side, where the conversion is 50-to-1, I need 36 transactions. The conversion is 50-to-1. I multiply the two, and I need a database of 1,800 then. It needs to be bigger because I'm not that engaged. A database of 1,800 is what you would need, and you figure out how many do you have in there now, how many could you add in a week. The point is, it gives you a sense of how big does your database need to be. It's not always, the size of the database, it's the quality. I heard Michael Brand on one of the Ask Al calls. Michael, if you don't know his name, he's our regional director for Keller Williams Tri-State. And he talks about an agent who you'll hear from again in a few minutes. Her name is Madeline Diab. And she's one of the top agents in the Garden State Multiple Listing Service. And she's a top agent in the office that Michael had worked in. And he said that she consistently did top 5 business with a database of about 135 people. She didn't need thousands and thousands of people. She just needed 135 of the right people. And I suspect that her database converted even better than 10 to 1. But the point is, the models will tell you how big a database you need, right? Now, here's the cool thing about Command. Command is going to factor that in. Let's go back to the exercise that I showed you with Command. And again, this was an agent in a different market center that was trying to generate $100,000 of profit. In order to do that, we put in the 36,000 of expenses. We put in the 40,500. It calculated the conversions, and it told us, here's the number right here, 176,500 is the gross commission income that you're going to need to put into the pipeline at the top of the funnel, so that what comes out is profit that you want. And we assumed in this, remember, we assumed this was a $500,000 sale. We assumed it was a $12,500 gross commission per transaction. We divide 176.5 by 12,500, which was the exercise we did several slides ago to figure out how many closings I need. And Command tells us we need 15. It's actually 14.12, but we always want to round up because it's hard to close a 0.12. The beauty of Command right now is now we go back and I told you it was going to tell you how many listings how many leads and how many buyers. Well, here's the thing. Remember those conversions? It said I needed 256 people that were leads that I would follow up with one-way communication 19 times a year. We know that converts at 50 to 1. If I take 256 and divide it by 50, I'm going to get 5.12 closings coming out of this group of people. I know that the contacts converts at 10 to 1. If I have 90 and I divide by 10, I got 9 units. If I add 9 units and 5.12 units, I get exactly the 14.2 that Command said I needed. We're going to round that up. These numbers are not fairy dust. These numbers will tell you how many people do you need to get into your database and what level of relationship do you need to have? Because if you trust the numbers, you're going to be on track. Questions about this? We're almost done with the numbers portion. This is a lot of numbers for an afternoon. But questions about this? Command will do this for you.
I have a question.
Bring it on.
If you already have some closings, but you have not utilized this goals tab on Command, can you add those transactions?
No, I don't believe you can. So for the first year, you're going to have to do some manual calculations, because I think the only way that the closings get in is through transactions being closed in Command. And since we've been outside of the Command system for this year, your numbers are going to be a little bit wonky this year. Starting next year, though, it'll be perfect.
Okay. So would you suggest maybe putting in the goal for the remainder of the year instead of doing the whole year?
Yeah, that's what I would suggest. But the other thing that you have to keep in mind, though, is this is assuming 12 months a year, and we only have now 5, right? Because we're halfway through the year. So you're going to have to massage those numbers a little bit, and I can help you do that. If you want to jump into an office hour, I can help you do that. This year, as you're transitioning into this system, it's going to be a little funky. But the point is, the thing that doesn't change is these numbers are spot on. These numbers are spot on of how many people I need to have in there and what's the level of relationship, right? I told you that the model also determined why it was so cost effective to kind of work with your own database. Again, back to lead gen 3612.3 and the example that I used there. If you figure out what is the cost of each touch in my smart plan, and you know, the beauty of smart plans is that some of the things that we do, there's no cost for. An email, free. A text message, pretty much free. A telephone call, free, pretty much, right? But some of the things in our smart plans might have a dollar figure. I might want to actually send you a report or send you a postcard, or maybe a couple times a year I want to send some branded thing like a potato chip bag clip that has my name on it, or a calendar at the end of the year, or maybe once a year I do something special like give a pie to my past clients, and that costs $10. If you think about what is the cost per touch average over the course of the whole campaign, what we find is that the average right now in the United States is about $1 a touch, meaning it's probably going to cost you $12. Actually, in the MREA, and again, I should have updated this for the new models of 19 touches a year. In the MREA, it's 12 times a year. We've upped that to 19 times a year. But initially, the model in the MREA said 12 times a year. But here's the point. The numbers don't change in this outcome. If I need 1,800 people, which is what we said we would need if we were going to get all of our business this way, and I reached out to people 12 times a year, and each touch on average was $1. Some were free, some cost something. Cost $12 a year per person. And then what I do is take 1,800, multiply by $12. It's going to cost me $21,600 to get the business that turns into 36 transactions and generates 450 GCI. And to be fair, what I said was the new model is really 19 times a year. If I multiply 1,800 by 19, it's really 34.2. I should have adjusted that slide. But my point is this: would you invest $34,000 to generate $450,000? Please say yes. Please say yes. That return on investment is staggering. On the other side, though, the part of the database that converts higher, the nurtured, the contacts, the people that I've got a relationship with, a 10-to-1 conversion. On average, each one of those touches is, again, $1 a touch. On average, some free ones and some expensive ones. But if I need 360, 36 times a year is 12,960 individual touches. If each one costs $1, then it costs me $12,960 to generate the same 450. Would you invest that much? Please say yes. And then if you do the cost per transaction, if I got 36 transactions and it cost me $12,960, it's costing me $360 a transaction. Here, what I really said was it's 34.2 divided by 36 transactions. It's $950 a transaction. It's almost 3 times cheaper to work with people that you already have a relationship with. That's what the models tell us. And it's just something that we study year after year after year, every single year. There's agents whose business we track and we monitor, and these models work, these numbers hold. And so as Tony Robbins said, the way I succeed is I figure out who's doing what I want to do, and I just kind of copy them. You know, I have an autographed Tom Ferry book behind me, the great Tom Ferry, who is one of the great real estate coaches in the business. And Tom Ferry talks about businesses should run an R&D department, right? Now, if you come out of the corporate world, R&D stands for research and development. What Tom Ferry is saying is that businesses should run R&D, meaning rip off and duplicate. Find people who are doing what you want to do and just copy them. And just rip them off. Don't steal copywritten material. Don't do things that you shouldn't do. Just find out what they do and do it. This is it, guys. This is what it is. And so once you figure it out, now what we got to do is we got to stomp on the gas, right? Now we've got to try to keep your touches low, keep your costs low. We've got to market as a technique to build people into your database, to attract people through our marketing efforts. We're going to prospect and get people into our funnel through our prospecting efforts. But then we really just got to go to town and drive this model. Now, I'm going to change gears here for a second into the budget model. The budget model says, how are you going to make sure that you're profitable? How do you make sure that you don't squander your money? Well, we've got to set some limits. And the MREA tells us what those should be. Couple ideas here. Lead with revenue, meaning try not to spend a whole lot of money until you've got money coming in. Now, in the beginning of your real estate career, when there ain't no money coming in, you got to lead with spending money. I get it. But be as judicious as you can with that spend. What you really want to do is try to make sure that the money that you're investing is returning a good return on investment, that you spend it and you have expectations for what it should achieve and you hold it accountable. There's this game that we used to play as kids in the summertime. When I was a kid, at least, we called it red light, green light. And in red light, green light, what would happen is one kid would stand at the back of the yard and he would turn around and he'd cover his eyes. He'd say green light and everybody would run towards him. And then he'd spin back around again and say red light and everybody had to stop. And anybody who didn't stop he would say, you kept moving. I saw you move. You got to go back to the beginning. And that was red light, green light. Well, you spend money the same way. It's green light, you spend the money, and then you stop and decide, is this working? Is this generating the outcome that I wanted? If it is, I'm going to green light it again. If not, I'm going to keep it red lighted again. But that's something that you constantly have to hold your dollars accountable to the expectations of what you want them to do. And we talked here about cost of sales being the money that you spend to acquire income, or the money it takes to be in relationship with your broker. We talked about expenses, meaning the money you spend on running your business and operating your business. You know, the faster you cap in our world, the better your life is, because it's a race. Because when you get to that 37,000 cap and you get to the 40,000 in total, at that point, you get to keep all of the dollars, and that's where your income explodes. What you really want to do is determine how many transactions it takes, not just to hit your income goal, how many transactions it takes to cap. Because your cap is tied to an annual cycle, right? And so here's what I want you to know. There's 2 dates related to your date of hire, right? Is the actual date of hire, but then you have what's called a cap anniversary date. And the cap anniversary always falls on the first day of the next month after your hire date. Christina, I see you just turned on your camera. Do you know what month you were hired in? You're silent, you're muted. She's gonna type it into chat. I love that way. It kind of makes me feel like Marceau doing a mime exercise. It's really fun.
All right, I think I got it.
Oh, you did it. Good for you. What month did you start?
Either the end of June or beginning of July.
All right, so let's assume it was the end of June. What that means is July 1st is your cap anniversary. That means you have all the business that you can do, and once you cap, you keep all the 100% of the commission. You don't share any of it with the broker again until July 1st. When July 1st comes, you uncap, you start being on a split again until you cap. And that cycle goes like that. And the goal is, how fast can you cap? Because the faster you cap, the more money you make. The worst thing in the world is to hit your cap and not have any more business in the pipeline before you uncap again. God, that is annoying. The faster you cap, the more money you keep. It's a race. You know, I think the fastest record cap in our organization, I believe, and I don't hold me to this because I'm not 100% sure, but I thought I heard one time from the MCA in Tenafly that the Zamira group capped in 48 hours. That could be wrong, but it probably isn't wrong by much, right? And that means you get the benefit of keeping all the money all year long. Sue Adler, who I know, she doesn't, there was a time when I worked with her in Summit, she just would write a check. You know, when she uncaps, she'd just say, oh, all right, then it's $40,000 here, have it. Because she had so much money coming in, she could do that, right? But the thing you want to figure out is not just how many transactions it takes to hit your goals, how many transactions it takes to hit the cap and get those under your belt as fast as you can. And so how do we figure that out? Well, we're going to go back to the average sale price of 500 with the 1200, 500 GCI. We know that the company dollar is 30% of this number. That's what the company keeps. And so 30% of 12,500 is 3,750. With every $500,000 closing, the company is keeping 3,750. And we said that the royalty is 6% that goes to international with a cap of 3 a year. But that means 6% of this number, which is 750, every time I have a $500,000 closing, 750 goes to KWRI, 3,750 goes to your office. I hit my cap on the royalty at $3,000, which is 3,000 divided by 750 per deal in 4 closings. I'm done with the cap on my royalty. Now I get to keep that money too. On the company dollar side, it's 3,000. 3,700 is what your cap is for your office. Or again, I did this. This is back to the example I did with the agent with 37.5. but it's essentially the same thing. If I'm getting $3,750 to the company in 10 closings, they're going to get the 37 that I need, and I'm capped. And so the game is, how many closings do I need to get to the number that I want, but how fast can I get those 10? Because if I can get these 10 in like 3 or 4 months, then I'm skating the rest of the year. If it takes me 10 months or 11 months, or God forbid I get the 10th closing on the last transaction before my cap cycle, then I never get the benefit of being 100%. Any questions around this? I want to make sure you understand how this works. Christina says you thought you only had to December 31st. No, my friend, you have a year. It's the first day of the month after your hire date. So if it's July that you started in, your cap cycle is actually August 1st, which means you actually have right now, today, a year and a couple weeks, right? Okay. The budget model says, how much does it take to be profitable? And there's a couple of assumptions here. For most businesses, salaries are your biggest expense. And, you know, for most solo agents, you're not paying a salary to other people, right? What the MREA model says at its highest level budget model, it says this: 30% of the gross money goes to the broker. 30% of the gross money is what you should put aside to run your business, and you get to keep 40%. You got to pay taxes out of it, but you get to keep 40%. That's the 50,000 foot view on the MREA model. And a lot of times agents say, wait a second, hold up. You know, if I only get to keep 40 cents out of every dollar that I earn, that's not enough. I don't want to give so much money away. Well, look, let me tell you something. In a different business, if you've ever owned another business, you know, you would be thrilled to keep 40% profit. If you think about a franchise, a restaurant, a McDonald's, I mean, a McDonald's franchisor would be thrilled to keep 7 or 8 cents out of every dollar they sell, because there's so much overhead in that system between the amount that you've got to pay for the real estate that you're housed in. Most of McDonald's money, the wealth of McDonald's, isn't really in selling the hamburgers. They're the biggest landlord in the restaurant business. Every one of those franchisors renting that place that McDonald's owns. But what happens is 7 cents a transaction is nothing until you go out to the parking lot and point to the sign that says billions and billions of people have eaten here. And if you have 7 cents a dollar times billions of people, you're making real money. We don't do that much volume. 40 cents on the dollar is huge, but we're not doing that many deals. And so here's the thing. We said 30% of the money is what you should allocate to run your business. It's not exactly 30%. Truth be told, it's like 29.2, but I'm just rounding it up. But it includes in that 30%, that 12% of your gross revenue is money that you as a business owner are paying other people as staff. And we're not all at the place where we've got paid staff. Think admin, think transaction coordinator. You know, you have dollars and you have time. And the game is, in the growth of my business, when I don't have dollars coming in, I got to spend my time and do this stuff. And it sets us up sometimes, because sometimes we're not particularly good at that stuff. But only thing I have to invest is my time. And as I have money coming in, then I can spend some dollars to pay someone else to do that stuff. And that's called leverage, right? What it says is the upper limit of how much you should put aside for paid staff is 12%. In the budget model, this was the GCI from the 36-12-3 class. We said that would lead to $450,000 a year if we got 36 closings. 12% of that says I have $54,000 a year to pay for staff. You know, if you don't have paid staff, you get to keep that money, but you have to do that work. And what that means is, instead of having 30% of your gross revenue to run your business, you have 30% plus 12 that you get to keep, which means you're really running your business on 18% of your gross revenue. Do you follow the math on that? Because you're keeping that 12% for salary, and you only are running at 18%. And I'm going to tell you this, most solo agents in our market right now are probably running even leaner than 18% of their GCI to run their operations. And here's why. We have the benefit of being in a very high-priced market. And the benefit to that is, and there's some challenges to that too, because we have a high-priced market, we have a lot of competition. There's a lot of agents that want to work in real estate when you could make 12 grand a throw every time you have a closing. But if you think about your operating business expenses, there's some expenses that we call fixed expenses, meaning they don't change regardless of the volume of business we do. Think board dues, think your E&O expenses. Whether you sell a house or you don't sell a house, that number stays fixed. And then there's these other expenses that we call variable expenses, meaning they change depending on the volume of business that you're doing. Think marketing costs. Think the number of real estate for sale signs you need to own. The more listings you take, the more signs you have to pay for. Those variable expenses change, hence the name. Well, because we have such a high price point, we don't need as many individual sales to occur to get us to the same GCI goal as somebody who's working in a less expensive market. Last year, for my wife's birthday, I took her to a really cool, I thought it was a really cool gift. We ever watched the show Treehouse Masters? It's a guy named Pete Nelson who builds these really luxury tree houses. Interestingly enough, the guy's from Ridgewood, and he has a television show on, I think it's on Animal Planet. But these really wild, luxury, gorgeous homes up in the trees. And there was a place outside of, in West Texas that had a treehouse resort that Pete built. And so for her birthday, I decided to take her to there. It was a surprise, and we went to the treehouse. Well, the treehouse was in a place called Utopia, Texas, population 187 people. It was a tiny little podunk Western Texas town where the average sale price in that market was about $115,000. Well, if you're trying to generate $100,000 of net profit to fund your perfect life and you're only selling $115,000 homes, you got to sell a hell of a lot more of them than if you're selling $500,000 homes, which means your variable expenses are going to be larger. Because we're in a high-priced market, we don't have as many variable expenses. And so it's cheaper for us to run our business. It's cheaper for us. What I said the model is 30% of your total overall gross commission income to run your business. If you're a solopreneur, you keep that 12%. That means you have 18% to play with. And in our market, I'm going to say you could probably do it closer to 13%. Just from experience and coaching, you could probably run your business that lean. But what I want you to understand is how much money do I have for all my different expense categories? Because your second biggest one is your lead generation expense. We budget about 9 to 10%, about 9.2 of your total budget to generate leads, to acquire new business. And why that's important is you got to be able to make good decisions, good business decisions, right? You're going to get that phone call from Zillow who's going to call you up and say, you know what, Eric, good news for you, brother. There's now advertising going on in your zip code. There's a spot that's opened up. I can sell you advertising space in our web portal. It's only going to cost you $600 a month. And you're like, whoa, hold up. $600 a month, that's real money. It is real money. In fact, if you average it out, it's $7,200 a year, which is real money. And look, I know plenty of agents who are running really, really big businesses who are spending $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 to Zillow a month to generate the business, but they're running big teams. For most of us, $600 is $7,200 a year. It's like, hold up, I don't want to spend that. And then what they're going to say is, you know what, Eric, here's the deal, dude. You know, your average price is so high. It's $12,500 a closing. All you have to do is close one. We're going to send you leads every single month. All you got to do is convert one of them and it's paid for itself. And then you're challenged with this dilemma. You're like, all right, that makes sense. I got to be able to close one. Like if you're sending me leads every month, I got to be able to convert one of them. And so you take the bait. But if your goal, and let's go back to my friend who we were doing a $100,000 profit plan for, she needed $187,000 of gross commission income If she had 187,000 of gross commission income and 9% of it was reserved to generate leads, she gets 16,800 bucks for the whole year. And if she spends 7,000 of it, a little over half, or just about half, on one lead source, it sure as hell better generate more than one a year that you wouldn't have otherwise had. It better generate about half of her revenue next year, or that investment didn't return what it needed to. You follow the math on this? Because I want you to understand the budget model, not to the extent that you're going to become a CPA, not to the extent, I just want you to be able to make good decisions based on how much should I be allocating for the different expenses of running my business. And we kind of map it out here. Again, this is from the MREA, and you can go right into the book and take a look at it. It's about 12% for salary. We talked about 9.2 for lead gen, 2% for what we call occupancy. Now, what's occupancy? Well, that would be things like, are you renting a desk in the office? How much does it cost to have that? That would include, things like, who knows? It's usually tied to space that you're going to occupy. It really doesn't matter that much how you define exactly these things, as long as you do it consistently year over year. For example, technology and phone. There was a time before smartphones when technology and phones were logical separate categories. Now with smartphones and computers and tablets, these get blurry, right? But you have about 1.5% for your technology or 1% for your phone. And if your technology and your phone are the same, it's about 2.5%. We'd say about 1% for office supplies and about 1% for continuing education. Make sure you invest in yourself. What you're doing here is free. That's great. You're investing time, and I appreciate you for it. But there's going to be times when you're going to have to invest. Maybe there's some specialized learning and you're going to have to go take a class somewhere. Do it. The money that you spend on developing yourself is money that is never, never, never wasted. But it's probably going to need to be limited to about 1% of your gross commission income, or you're not going to really be profitable enough. Equipment, insurance, all those things, they're all spelled out in the MREA. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but use these to kind of guide your decision making. That's what the model allows you to do. It allows you to make better decisions, right? And then finally, the organizational model. We said that that's about leverage. No one succeeds alone. Hire an assistant when you can't keep up. You don't really need an assistant until you can't keep up. Now, to some extent, look, I worked with I hired a guy about 10 years ago who was an entrepreneur. He was very successful. He had a couple of different successful startups under his belt, and he was really good at creating and growing businesses. And he came into the real estate space and he said, here's what I know about me and how I work. I'm a big picture guy. I'm a visionary. I'm a guy that can create passion and excitement, and I believe that I can get sellers to want to work with me because of the way that I'm going to approach it and the energy that I bring to it. But I also know that I'm disorganized, as many smart creative types are. And I know that I'm not a detail guy. And so even though you tell me to lead with revenue and I don't have any yet, and even though you tell me not to hire an administrative person until I've got more business than I can manage, I'm going to hire an administrator right out of the gate, because without that person, I'm going to have to do it myself, and that's not my strength, and I'm not that good. And so you get to decide, and truth be told, the guy hired an admin right out of the gate, and in his very first year, he was Circle of Excellence Silver level, which is a pretty good achievement for a brand new agent. And then from there, it was off to the races, because he knew himself and what worked for him. But understand that leverage is about giving you the ability to make a hard job easier. It's not about creating an infrastructure so that you hope you can grow into it. That's the mistake that too many businesses make, is they ramp up in good times and they create positions in the hope that the revenue will come, and then they're vulnerable. God knows how many businesses, when COVID came, that had to furlough people. And that was simply because volume disappeared. But in so many businesses, they make the decision to add infrastructure before they really need, the volume doesn't dictate it, and then you're not profitable, right? The purpose of business is to create profit. If you're not creating profit, stop, go back to the beginning and figure out how to create profit. Because if you're not creating the profit, you're not creating the perfect life. And life is too short. You know, the healthcare job that I had before real estate is I spent 10 years running hospice programs, actually 12, but I was only running them for about 10. And, you know, over that period of time, sitting at the bedside with hundreds, maybe thousands of people at the end of their life, primarily as a therapist in the very beginning, you know, what I can tell you is nobody on their deathbed says, damn it, I wish I worked more. You know, what they say is, I wish I used my time differently when I had a chance. I wish I spent it with the people that matter. And instead I got so caught up in stuff that didn't matter with the people that did matter. And I had my priorities all out of line. Well, one of the things is if you're working and you're not creating profit, that is not going to get you where you want to be. Stop, go do something else. Figure out how to make profit or find another way to do it, right? But anyway, hire when you need to. And the best first hire is the administrative person, is the person who takes all the BS off of your plate so you can go out and do what you do well, which is work with clients and generate business and make things happen. Hire carefully. You know, there's an adage that we have in this company that we hire slowly and fire quickly. And the idea is what we want to make sure is we want to minimize risk. The difference between an entrepreneur and a gambler is that they both take risk, but the entrepreneur takes calculated risks. You know, you think about who's the guy from Virgin Atlantic, the guy who's the big Richard Branson. You know, I heard an interview one time with Tony Robbins actually talking about his friendship with Richard Branson, who has just got so many cool businesses running. And he says, you know, Richard Branson is probably the biggest, most cautious scaredy cat in business. He takes big risks, but he calculates exactly what the downside is. And he doesn't gamble. He doesn't take dangerous risks. He takes calculated risks. And when you're hiring somebody, there's a risk if you haven't hired carefully, if you haven't thought about what is the task that I need this person to do, and how do I recruit the right person to do the right task. There's a course that we teach called Career Visioning, which helps you think about what skills are particularly necessary for the different roles. Think about your market centers. You have a team leader and you have an MCA. And the role of the team leader is to grow your market center, to create a big energetic vision that becomes attractive to more productive agents and to grow the business and to get the offices to recruit and to become bigger. That's your team leader's job. It's quite honestly not your team leader's job to be able to, you know, troubleshoot all your problems in your deals. That's partly why I have put office hours out there, because your team leaders don't have the time to do that and they're not going to do that. Their job is to grow the office. Your MCA's job is to make sure that things are running efficiently and you're getting paid on time. I can promise you, because I know your team leaders and I love your team leaders and I know your MCAs, you do not want your team leaders processing your commission checks. I can promise you they're going to screw it up. But you do want your MCAs because it's the right skill and the right temperament for the role. And when you know what you're looking for, you can hire differently. You can interview differently. And career visioning helps you think about all the different roles on a real estate team. And how do I find somebody differently who is going to be a buyer's agent versus a listing agent? Who do I need who's going to be an administrator versus a transaction coordinator? It's a totally different skill set. And we recruit for the right role. We hire carefully, and then we put people on a 90-day plan. And it's just simply to say, look, we have to give you time to prove yourself. But if it ain't working, we're going to pull the plug early because that minimizes the downside expense. You look at an administrator, an admin for a full-time admin on a real estate team could easily cost $40,000 or $50,000 a year. And a lot of agents are saying, that's a lot of money. I don't know if I want to be on the hook for 40 or 50. Well, the truth of the matter is you're not. You're really on the hook for about 12,500. Why? Because you're going to know after 3 months if this is going to work or not. And if it's not, you're going to pull the plug. And in 3 months on a $50,000 salary, you only spent 12,500. You didn't spend 50. You're only going to spend 50 when they've proven that they can do the job. And so the models teach you, how do you think about running your business efficiently as a business person? And then we put these goals into action. right? There's another class that I do on the GPS. It's GPS. I wrote GSP. I guess I might have been thinking about driving on the Garden State Parkway there. But goals, priorities, strategies, when I know where I'm going to try to get to, I'm going to try to get to this much gross commission income. That's my goal. At the end of the day, I've got to prioritize my action. What am I going to do? How am I going to structure my activities in a prioritized way so that I'm not just flailing around willy-nilly doing anything that comes to mind, that I've got a focus and a plan? Because you start with your GCI goal. In larger teams, if you're on a larger team, you might think a unit goal. I know some teams that say last year we closed 200 transactions. This year we want to get to 250. That's great. For most solo agents, it's going to be how much gross commission income am I trying to bring into my world? For most agents, the way you want to prioritize your activity is recognize 75% of your business is going to come out of your database. It's people you already know. And so put an inordinate amount of time there, right? The 80-20 rule says that not everything matters the same. 80% of our results come from 20% of our activities. And if 80% of the volume comes from my database, I should be spending 80% of my time there, right? And build it, nurture it, use command, put people in, put them on the right smart plans, keep those relationships nurturing, putting together a strategic priority of activities that feeds that database, that nurtures that database, is got to be priority number one. For most of us, the second smartest priority is have a geographic anchor. You cannot be an expert in everything. And people pay for expert level knowledge. It's no different in medicine. You go to a doctor who's an internist versus a doctor who's a cardiothoracic surgeon. Who do you think's making more money? The surgeon is, because the surgeon has expert skills, specific skills. Whereas the other, while they're perfectly competent, and they're a doctor for God's sake, but they're a generalist. And if you're trying to be everything to everybody and trying to work in a market all over Bergen County, and you see it as a badge of honor that I do my business anywhere, then you're a generalist. And as a generalist, you're not going to be good enough to separate yourself from the true specialist. So pick a lane, find a community that you can do your business in and focus on it, and maybe even a demographic priority. I know some people that want to work with specifically people that have similar experiences. I know agents that specialize in people that move in the military or people that move who are downsizers. But I will tell you this, I'm going to share these numbers. I told you that I would talk about, it was actually Michelle Klug who I wanted to talk about before. But what I said is pick a lane, right? This isn't just a snippet. Now, I didn't do this in your MLS, although I have done it in your MLS before, and it works exactly the same. This is just a visual using a piece of software that I have called Brokermetrics. And it allows us to take a look at the top 5 agents in the MLS. It actually allows us to look at the top 1,000 or so. But this is the top 5 agents in the Garden State MLS, where I happen to be a member. And it's broken down here in terms of dollar volume, right? So in the search that I did, and this was from the period of March 1st, 2019 to February 29th, 2020, in this 1-year block, right before COVID hit, Sue Adler, Keller Williams and Summit, was the #1 agent by dollar volume, 181,000 closed. Michelle P.S., #2, $61,000 closed. If you look at unit volume, Michelle does many more units than Susan. Susan does higher priced units. Michelle does more volume. But the point is, then you have Arlene Ganella, Weichert in Summit. You have Susan Ollendorp, Keller Williams in Summit. You have Michelle Klug, Keller Williams Town Square, which is, I believe, Bernardsville. These are the top 5. And here's what I want you to see. This is what I want you to totally understand about geographic specialization. If you look at where they're doing their business, here's Sue, #1 agent. How much business is she doing in Melbourne and Summit? Well, you add these two together, it's almost half of her business. She's not spread into thousands of markets. She dabbles in some of these other markets, and Sue has a team, so she's got other people there too. But most of Sue's business is right here, 1 or 2 towns, period. Let's go on to Arlene. Arlene is the #3 agent in the market. And look at this, 76% of the volume is in Melbourne, period. She's not spending time trying to go 15,000 places. She's picking a lane and she's crushing it. Let's look at Susan Ollendorp. You've got 60% of your business between Madison and Summit done. Pick a lane, dominate it. Michelle Klug, Bridgewater, almost half in one town alone. The point is this: what the smart, successful agents totally get, and it's counterintuitive, is that there is much more business for you if you pick a smaller market and dominate it than there is if you try to spread out and try to be too much to too many people in too many different markets. Now, to be fair, Michelle, who is a great agent and a great lady, and she just had a baby who's absolutely adorable, she's kind of spread around all over, but she's built into an expansion team model. She has one office in Springfield. She has another office here in Westfield where I live, and she's got sort of expansion agents in some of these different towns. So that model looks a little different, but it doesn't take away from the reality that your priority should be to pick a geographic area and dominate it, and really start to think about what mix of activities am I going to use to break in to that geographic area. We think about the strategies as being specific and measurable and actionable, meaning they're things that I control. They're realistic. Can I do it? Do I know how to do it? Am I willing to do it? And they're time bound, right? When do they have to be done by? So for example, I could have a marketing strategy that says, or a prospecting strategy that says, I want to door knock in my target town. That's great. But let's make this smart. Specifically, what doors? Measurable, how many doors? Time bound, how many doors over what time period? Is it 10 doors a week? Is it 10 doors a month? Is it 10 doors a day? Is it 10 doors an hour? Because they will get you to very different places. Specific and measurable. Are they actions that I can initiate? Is it realistic? Is the volume realistic? Is my skill set there, right? All of these different things inform how we put together our business plan. We call it the GPS. I'm going to put a GPS class on the calendar for a whole deep hour coming up in a few weeks. And I encourage you to jump into it, because we're going to wind this down here now at 3. But what I want you to know is, at the end of the day, this GPS, what we do is we have our priorities. This is my overarching goal. I've got a couple of key priorities of how I'm going to structure my activities. I'm going to have a database plan. I'm going to plan on kind of breaking into a specific geographic footprint. Maybe I'd layer in a demographic. Maybe I want to work with people who speak a certain language or have a certain life experience. I don't recommend that any agent go to that third priority until they've mastered these first 2. And then specifically, what am I going to do? Specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, time-bound. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. If I do these 5 things, my database priority is going to be great. If I do these 5 things from a marketing and prospecting standpoint, my geographic priority is going to work, and I'm going to get the market share that I need to hit the numbers that I want. Now we've got a menu of activity that says, what do you do when you go to work? What do you do when you lead generate? Everybody thinks lead generation is picking up the phone and cold calling strangers. It's not. It's not. In fact, cold calling strangers is the least effective form of lead generation in any sales environment. It's the last thing that you should do. And I'm not saying you should never do it. What I'm saying is you shouldn't make that the target. There's other things that are going to be better, that are going to convert better, right? When you map those activities out onto your GPS, and then you have 3 hours a day or whatever you're going to time block to do your lead generation in, you do these things, because everything else is a distraction. If you execute this plan, you should generate the appointments that you need. And if you're not, then you go back and look. How come? I'm doing the things. How come the appointments aren't happening? And then you got to evaluate it. Maybe I'm doing the right stuff. I'm just not doing enough of it. I have a coaching company that I run outside of my life at Keller Williams, and I was coaching a real estate agent yesterday from a different company. And she's getting some traction, but she's not talking to enough people. And she's good at what she does, and she's good at her scripts, but she's just not talking to enough people. That's a volume issue. And sometimes it's a skill issue. Sometimes I'm not that good at this task yet. I got to get better. Sometimes I just pick something that's just stupid, and I don't know what I shouldn't be doing that. Do something else that would be more productive. But the GPS helps bring focus, so you can build priority, so you can build momentum, and you can tie all this together. So that's where we're going to park this today, the 4 models, the economic model, the numbers that we need to track to, the lead generation model, how big a universe of people do I need to get into my database, and what percentage of them should be the lead level, and what percentage should be the contact level, and how am I going to engage using smart plans? And then the budget model, how am I going to make sure that I'm spending my money wisely so that I'm profitable enough and I'm not squandering my money? And then the organizational model, how am I going to bring leverage so that my business can be run as easily as I can? And when I do all of that, then I think about prioritizing my activity in a database focused plan, in a geographically based focused plan. What specific measurable things do I need to execute to ensure the success of this plan? When you do it this way, your business works. I heard Gary Keller say one time, the problem that most agents have is, guys, this is boring as all get out. There's nothing sexy or exciting about what we just did for 2 hours. You watch HGTV and it's fun and it's exciting and it's like, it's cool. I love this. I get to show houses and I get to be with fun people. And running a business is a job and it's not fun. Ultimately, it becomes something that becomes fun, especially as you become profitable. But what Gary Keller says sometimes is most agents don't have the stomach for the monotony of running an effective business. And they're always looking for the fun part. And I'm not saying you should be unhappy. I'm not at all saying that. What I am saying, though, is that this is how businesses run. And when you do it this way, you will create the profit that you're looking for, that you can fund your perfect life. And if you do it this way, you can grow the business to a level where you can hire people to do the stuff that you don't like to do. And then it's real fun, right? So this is where we're going to park it for today. I am going to ask, as I always do with every class, for any kinds of ahas. And I know that trying to jam an 8-hour workshop into 2 hours is hard. I know that a lot of these numbers, your head is probably swimming. But give me any kind of light bulbs or any kind of ahas or anything that popped out that sticks with you of anything we said here today. Anybody? I think I've knocked you all out. You're all snoring right now with all of these numbers. They're like, man, it's hot. I'm taking a nap.
Well, Hal, I mean, one of the things, it's nothing new, but it's really brought it back, is focus on geography.
I wanted you to see this. I wanted you to see these bar graphs because it's one thing for me to tell you. I'm showing you right here.
Yeah, I love that. I really did.
I mean, and I have done this in virtually every MLS in New Jersey, and the numbers are always the same. Number one, agents dominate a niche. They do not try to spread themselves out into too many markets, because the further you spread out, the more generalized your skills have to become just out of sheer volume. And then the less useful you are to people, right? So
yeah.
Anything else?
Thank you.
You got it. All right, guys, thank you for hanging for 2 hours. There's a lot to get through here, and it's a hot summer afternoon, so I appreciate you for doing that. If this is the first time you're hearing this content, you're probably a lot to absorb. I believe this is recorded. I hope it's recorded. And I'll park it up on the Bergen County Partners page a little bit later on, so you can come back and watch it again. But any questions that you have, pick up the phone, give me a call, give me a text, jump into one of the office hours that I do on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. If you would want to just kind of carve out a little bit of time to take a look at your own business and how to think about this for your own business, I do have some limited time availability that I can do that for. So reach out to me. I did that for an agent this morning in Tenafly, and we just took a look at her business and tried to take a look at these numbers. So be happy to do that for you. Just let me know. All right, guys.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right, guys. Have a wonderful afternoon. Talk to you all soon.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.